Welcome to the Social Engineer Podcast, the SC Etc. series. I'm Chris Hadnagy, your host of this podcast, and this is episode number 208. And I've been hosting this podcast since way back in, I don't even know, when did we start this? 2009?
Way back.
Feels like a really long time. Way back. I'm also the CEO of Social-Engineer LLC and the Innocent Lives Foundation and the Institute for Social Engineering. And this series is co-hosted by the one and only Patrick Laverty. Patrick, nice to have you here.
Oh, it's always so great to be here. Like you said, my name is Patrick Laverty. I'm the senior team lead at Social Engineer, where I get to work with an incredible team of 4 other social engineers who are professionals, certified. They get to do all their vishing, their phishing, their smishing, their impersonating, all those kinds of fun things that we get to do. So yeah, it's great to be here.
I like it. Impersonate-ishing. Yeah, I mean, it does feel weird not having an ishing, right?
Yeah, we need something like that.
Yeah, we do. We kind of do. And speaking of all of that, if you are curious of who is the sponsor of this episode, it is none other than Social-Engineer LLC. And instead of focusing on all the things Patrick just said, I want to talk to you about our training path. Our brand new website is out, and we're really excited about some of the changes we have made to our training. So what you may have known as the APSE course is now the Foundational Application of Social Engineering. And there has been some changes to the course itself, but let me explain to you why we made this change. We realized that this course is a foundational course for all applications of social engineering, whether you are an adversarial simulator, whether you're in management, whether you're using this just to become a better person. All of these principles apply across the board. But then after that, we have the practical application of social engineering course, which is a 4-day course. First one will be taught in June as a virtual course. You can find that on the website. And that course teaches you all about OSINT for 2 days. And then you actually do live vishing and phishing calls against actual targets that don't know their targets for the course. But of course, it's all legal and above board. And you'll actually practice the application of social engineering that you've learned in the first course or that you may know because you're in the field already. Now, once you're done with those 2 courses, you can take the Certified Ethical Social Engineer certification, and that certifies you as an ethical social engineer in the field. And then if you accomplish all that, you can be invited to our master's level social engineering course, which of course rounds that all out with the physical element of SE. We have 2 FASE courses coming up, one in July here in Orlando and one in September in Romania. So you can check that as long as the PASE course being virtual in June, like I said, and you can find that date on the website. For all the information on the courses that we have and a future one, which I'm really excited about, that Dr. Abby is writing all about the psychology of social engineering. You can check that out on social-engineer.com. Take a look at what training is coming up. Feel free to ask us questions, and we'll be more than happy to help you with the training path to become a professional social engineer. And if you like social engineering as a topic, then you should jump on over to our Slack channel. If you don't know how to get there, the link is in the show notes, or you can ping either Patrick or I on Twitter or LinkedIn or any other medium. We'll be more than happy to get you hooked up in there. We have now, I think I counted the other day, saw the number, it's almost 1,400 people in the Slack channel each and every day talking about everything from phishing, vishing, all the ishings, as well as the psychology of. We even have a job board where about 10 people have found employment. We have companies posting jobs inside the job board. In addition, we even have a practice group that gets together periodically to talk about practical applications and actually practice social engineering. So if you're interested in this, it's a family-friendly chat. We keep everything legal and above board. And of course, no bullying or online harassment or anything like that. Come on in if that sounds like you and you like the topic. Feel free to join us, and we'll be more than happy to show you around. Let's see, what else do we have? I want to invite everyone that's checking out the podcast to take a moment to go over to innocentlivesfoundation.org. If you're not familiar with what the ILF is, it's an organization that both Patrick and I are a part of that helps law enforcement around the globe geolocate and track people who abuse children, traffic children, or create child abuse material. Our mission there has been around for 5.5 years now. We're working hard with law enforcement, and we've done over 486 cases. I'm really proud of the team over there and the hard work that they do. And we have a lot of exciting new things happening. We're about to announce some really exciting new events for ILF here in 2023. So go over there, check out the innocentlivesfoundation.org. That's innocentlivesfoundation.org. And you can help us out by either volunteering your time if you have any capability there, or we're a nonprofit, so we need some donations to keep us running. So feel free to help donate to the cause. And if you're a parent or caregiver or anyone interested, we have a lot of information on the website that can help you talk to your kids about what's going on the internet and how to keep them safe. And last but not least, if you like the music here in the intro and outro of this podcast, if you're not on YouTube, that is, then you can check out the best rock and roll band on the planet Earth, Clutch. Check them out at pro-rock.com. They have a whole new tour. They're touring with Dinosaur. I mean, come on. They brought back some awesome bands. Helmet, Quicksand, Dinosaur. Okay, so you got to go check them out, and you'll be happy to listen to their music. They have a brand new album out. And, of course, they're huge supporters of the ILF, so we love Neil and the whole group over there. So give them some love and check them out and listen to their music because you will enjoy it. Okay, let's get to the actual events of today. Patrick, what is the topic du jour that you have come up with this month?
All right. We always have fun every month talking about our new topic. But I think before we get into that, one thing that I wanted to add to what you were talking about with the training is the opportunity to learn from the scary little human herself, that she's actually going to be teaching those classes. So if you're unfamiliar with the scary little human, you can definitely check her out online. That is Shelby Dacko, where she's going to be teaching the PACE and the FACE classes. And if you aren't familiar with her, Shelby is somebody who at a conference once, I believe, just got put into a booth without any preparation, without any kind of prior notice, and was told, go show off your skills and make a vision call against this target, and rocked it. So if you're somebody that
have done that to her,
you may have.
Yeah. I may have done that to her,
and she still speaks to you.
Yeah, she likes me. Although at that moment, I think there was some hatred.
One of those things that if looks could kill, I'm sure you would not be around anymore.
What I did is I stood back and didn't look at her.
Yep.
I didn't want to look her in the eye, but but after she was done, she did tell me that she was happy she did it because she got in there and just totally rocked it.
Yeah.
It's why she has the title Scary Little Human.
Yep. So yeah,
she's tiny and she's
if you're somebody that's ever wanted to learn some of these vishing skills, you can certainly take that PACE class with Shelby, where she will teach you all the different things that she does and actually everything that went through her mind when she got thrown into the booth and had to make that call. She did it with no preparation, no advance notice. But when you take the PACE class, you get plenty of advance notice and plenty of preparation. So if you're interested, come on, join that class. I'm sure Shelby would love to see you there. All right.
And Patrick's being a little modest, though, because he's also training both of those classes. So if you want to spend time with Patrick, Shelby, and some other guy, you can take those classes and you'll have a fun time for the week because we got some really great people helping out with those classes.
Whole lot of fun. All right. So back to this. We call this our SE at Sea podcast, where you have 4 different podcasts, I think, that you do every month, where you talk to thought leaders in the industry, you talk to C-level people in the industry, and you also have the Doctor is In with Dr. Abby Moronio, where you talk about some of the psychology and the science of social engineering. So we figured that was 3 different podcasts in this 4 weeks in a month, so we needed a 4th one. And we kind of came up with, well, let's get something we can talk about anything. So that's where we came up with Social Engineering, etc. This podcast you're listening to right now, one that I like to call the dumpster diving of podcasts, because you never know what you're going to find when you join us. We can talk about anything. If there's any topic that you ever thought that would be like, I really wish I could hear about that, let us know. Hit us up somewhere. And we've done that before. We've had suggestions from listeners, and we've talked about those types of things as well. So we're willing to do that. All right. So for this month, I think the idea that we came up with is that if you have any kind of familiarity around the cybersecurity field or the penetration testing field, maybe you've seen things like the penetration testing execution standard. Well, there is the same thing available for social engineering. There is the social engineering framework that has been around, which you can find online, and there'll be a link to it in the show notes, so you can check that out as well. Chris, do you want to give a little bit of a background about what is the social engineering framework and how that came to be?
Yeah, it's an interesting story because, again, when I tell these stories, I always wish I could start off with saying, I was a visionary and I thought this thing up and dreamt it one day and then it came to life. And it's never that way. It's always like, I did something and I just, stumbled into it. But let me tell you the story behind this. So when I worked for offensive security, it became evidently clear that exploit writing was not going to be my future. Although I had some experience with it, I really wasn't good at coding, remembering little things, but I was really good at humans. But whenever we would test something out, like during a test or an audit, and something would work, I didn't know why it worked. Like, why did that phishing email work? Or why did the security guard let me in? And, anyone with a hacker mentality, that irritates us. Like, we don't want to just have things work. We want to understand it. So I started to pick up books because I don't have an education in psychology or anything. But I started picking up books on things like influence and rapport. And if you're seeing this on YouTube, you can see many of the books behind me. I still have them. And I would read these books, and I would have a highlighter and a pen in every book. I still do that today. Like, I'm reading this book right now, and you can see that I have a highlighter and pen because when I read a book, I study it. That's why I like paper still. I haven't gotten to the digital realm with that. So all these books, I would highlight a point, write a note in it, and then next time I would have let's say a phishing test, I would say, I'm going to try that principle I read in Dr. Cialdini's book, and I'm going to see if I can apply this principle of reciprocity, and let's see how it works. And then I would come back in the book and write a note. I put a little sticky in there and say, okay, I tried this. This is how it worked. And those notes eventually became what I started writing out into a Word document that I was calling my own personal framework. And I started to formulate it out. And then at the time I was in a, oh boy, this is going to age me, IRC chat. I almost said Slack, but it wasn't Slack, IRC chat. And there was a bunch of people from the community in there. And I started telling them what I was doing. And some people said, I know a little bit about this topic. Like, do you want me to write something? Like, I remember Chris Nickerson, he came and he says, I know a little bit about communication profiling. Do you want me to write something for you? And I'm like, that'd be epic. So Chris wrote a few pages on communication profiling and gave them to me. And then I was like, this is awesome. So this started to formulate this huge document. And it was all with references to scientific books and other things, and then practical things. I started to look up news stories, like from scammers or con men that from the past, because at the time, phishing and vishing and all that wasn't making mainstream press, right? We're going back 2008, 2009 time. So I started to just do research onto news stories that were about scammers and con artists throughout history and say, they used this principle. Like I think of Frank Abagnale, and he used liking so much. People really felt he was charming. They really liked him. He was a friendly guy. Even when he got arrested, people were like, the FBI just were like, this guy was fun. Like, I liked him,
They hired him.
Yeah, they hired him after he got out, right? That's how much they liked him. So I started to write all this out. And then I just out of a whim went online and saw that social-engineer.org was available. So I bought the domain. And I had a friend in the community who knew a little bit about web design. And we started to put together this website, social-engineer.org. And at that time, I started to think about the podcast. So now we're hitting early 2009. And I said, no one's doing a podcast on social engineering. And I have dozens of pages of research on all these amazing psychological principles. Maybe we should talk about them. So Maddie and a couple others and we started doing the Social Engineer podcast. And we would come in every month, and I had this idea that instead of just me yapping about it, let's see if I can get somebody that is using one of these principles in the field. I remember my very first interview was with a law enforcement negotiator. So like negotiate hostages or with bad guys or things like that. And I had him on the podcast, and we talked about how he used social engineering principles. Then I had like comedians, actors, other types of auditors, just so many different rock stars, so many different types of people that would come on the show. And I would talk to them about this principle. Well, eventually we got the website done and we put the framework out there. And it's the framework is really what formulated everything else that has happened since then. That was, 2000, very early 2009 or late 2008 that we issued the framework. And so I don't know, how long has that been now? If we say 9 to 19 is 10 years, and now we're talking 14 years ago. And of course, since then we've modified it, added it, taken things away that are no longer scientific, updated it constantly. But that's the origin story of the framework.
That's really awesome. And one of the things is that I know that people that are in the cybersecurity field listen to us on this podcast, but I don't really want to limit it to just people that are in the cybersecurity field. So we don't want to assume that they always know what we're talking about either. So do you think we could also start off with a super really brief, what would you say is going to be a definition that we use of social engineering? Because one thing that I see is that I have like Google Alerts set, where every day I get new articles sent to me about social engineering, and I read those, and sometimes I see them and it's just like, this person is kind of on the right path, but not quite. So do you want to give a little bit of a definition of how you see social engineering, and then also differentiate how you see social engineering from manipulation? Because I think those two things often get conflated, and social engineering is often seen as a negative or even a criminal thing at all times.
Yeah, I remember when I first started doing research into this, and literally the only thing written about social engineering that used that phrase was the books by Kevin Mitnick, right? There wasn't much. There were some news stories about like the Badir brothers and others who had done malicious social engineering. So the definition that was always out there was the manipulation of a person to take an action that's not in their benefit. And I remember reading that and I'm like, okay, that made sense to me because of all I read. But then as I started reading all these books on psychology, and I started reading like Influence by Robert Cialdini and What Everybody is Saying by Joe Navarro, and I started reading all these different books and realizing that, hey, you know what? I see people using these skills every day, and they're not trying to hack me. They're not trying to steal my money. They're not trying to ruin my life. They're just communicating. And sometimes communicating in a great way using these skills is like a superpower. And we've all had this where you met somebody and you talk with them and you feel like you could just sit for hours and chat with them like they were your best friend. At the end, they didn't get your credit. They weren't doing anything bad. They were just a friendly person. And I said, boy, that's social engineering. Because the bad guy, like we'll use Frank Abagnale, Victor Lustwig, there's another famous con man through history. Those people use the same exact skills we just said, but at the end, they were doing it to con you out of money. But this person did the same exact thing, and it was just a nice conversation. So I said, that's interesting. And that doesn't make any sense to me that we're going to always define it as negative. So I came up with a definition that was any act that influences a person to take an action that may or may not be in their best interest. And I felt that defined it more wholly, because we sometimes see the very same skills used and someone's doing a bad thing. But we see the very same skills used and no bad thing has been done. Just recently, we taught a FASE class. FASE, yeah, okay, I said it right. And we had a guy come, and we go around the class and I say, "Can you tell me why you're here? I want to know why, so we can kind of temper the information to help you." And he said, "I came out of my own pocket just because I want to be a better dad and a better husband." And I'm like, "What?" Like, what? And he's like, "Yeah, I had some buddies take the class and they told me," and I was telling them what kind of things I was looking to do with my life. And they said, "Oh, you need to take this class." So this guy came just to learn communication skills so he can learn how to be a better husband and a dad. Amazing, right? So there is a way to use it. He's not going to go home and fish his family or vish them, but he was making application to all of these principles so that he can be a better communicator. So that definition to me separates the malicious use, but doesn't alienate it, because you can use the same exact principles and be a malicious person, or you use the same exact principles and you're not.
Yeah, I think I've, since coming to Social Engineer, and especially since taking the FASE, the FACE class, have also kind of learned communication skills, where previously I was somebody that was extremely introverted. I was somebody that didn't have really great communication skills. I'm typically somebody that likes to sit on the outside and observe. And one of the things that I've really learned is to be able to take some of those skills, whether that is going to be liking or even repeating back what people say, just to engage in the conversation. So I think some of those things have been extremely helpful in just learning how to be a better communicator, which is one of the reasons that when people talk about that FACE class, which, as you mentioned, used to be APSE, I often tell them that, yes, you can use it for a career in cybersecurity, but it's really not a cybersecurity class. It's really not a hacking class. I describe it more as a communications class, where you do learn both how to communicate with others, but you also do learn a lot about your own communication style as well with that. So I think using social engineering can be seen also in a positive light, along with the negative kind of criminal activity that we've seen as well, which leads me a little bit into, what do you think about the conflation of social engineering and the word manipulation? Does manipulation always fall into social engineering, or is that just something slightly different or some part of it?
I think it depends. And this is always a topic for debate. I think it depends on how you define manipulation, right? And I even on my own podcast, I had a little disagreement with this with Dr. Cialdini, right? And that's scary to say out loud because, I can't see myself arguing with the man. But here's what happened. I defined influence as like getting someone to want to do what you want them to do. So in essence, it becomes their idea, right? There's no force. At the end of the day, they think about it, their brain rationalizes it, and they go, yeah, I want to do this thing. But I define manipulation as getting someone to want to do what you want them to do. Right? And so it's not their idea. You just get them to do it. And that can involve fear, that can involve anger, that can involve a host of emotions that at the end of the day may leave them feeling worse for having met you. So when I look at social engineering and a classic example I use in a lot of speeches is the time that my daughter convinced me to have a princess tea party where I had makeup and nails done, right? And I can tell you there is not one other person on this planet that can ask me to do that. And I would say yes. And people will sometimes go, but you love her, so that's not really a great example. And I'm like, no, but if you understand how a decision is made. So you can ask me the same thing. Hey, after this podcast, let's get together and have a princess tea party. My brain's going to go, okay, should I do that? No, I really don't want to do that. And it's not because you're weird or I don't like you or I consider you a friend, but it's just not something I'm going to say yes to. But when my daughter asked me, oxytocin gets released in the brain and that trust rapport relationship is there. And now my brain's waiting to be rewarded by making her happy. It wants that dopamine release. So saying yes is going to issue those chemicals that are going to make me feel really good for saying yes to that decision. Whereas those same chemicals won't be there with you. So when you understand that, my daughter didn't manipulate me. She didn't come in crying and say, Daddy, if you love me, you'll do this. It wasn't that. It was, hey, let's do this, right? There was no manipulation involved. And I made the decision fully as a practical adult to say yes to that. There was no harm in that. So when I look at social engineering, I say it's not always manipulation in my mind. Now, some people say no matter what you're doing, and I'll just for the sake of argument, I'll tell you how Dr. Cialdini defines it, is that there's good and bad to both influence and manipulation. And that sometimes when you use either of them, that what changes the path of good or bad is your intent. Right. So my argument to that was, well, when we say influencer, we think of someone that we look up to. When we say manipulator, I don't want that. And he said, yeah, but what about if someone's manipulating you as a chiropractor? And I'm like, okay, decent argument. Right. So I'm willing to say that's my definition, the one I've held to forever. But I also do agree with the fact that your intent does change the method, right? Like here at the company, you brought this up. Every day you work with a team of people. You're vishing thousands of people a month. And our goal is to get them to give us information that they shouldn't give out over the phone so we can then educate them. But our intent for that is not so they get fired, not so we humiliate them, not so they get scolded and told that they're dumb. Our intent is to educate that person so that company is stronger and better. So that's why we're doing something that feels bad, but our intent is never the negative part. So I still look at that as a very positive side of social engineering.
And I think a lot of it also comes in with the principles of influence that are used with that, where we're not really, or I should say, we're not at all threatening people or anything like that in order to get that information. Some of the principles that can be used are often assistance, where, here's my pretext is that we're going to be upgrading the computer systems. And one of the ones that I'll sometimes use is that, well, we're going to be doing that in the next couple of weeks, and it's scheduled for the daytime. So you might have a little bit of an outage on your computer. Or if you want to, we can do that after hours. But for me to do that, I have to be able to log in as you. So if you give me your username and your password, I will make sure that happens at 2 a.m. You'll see no outages and everything will go through smoothly. And I'm sure some people listen and go, that's ridiculous. That's never going to work. Well, it does. Not a lot.
It works.
It doesn't work a lot. There are lots of people that say, I can't give you that information. But there are some who say, yeah, great. Here's my username. Here's my password. Do it at 2, 3 a.m. for me. So it's really, that's kind of going to be one of those differences where we are assisting people with that. And like Chris said, we're not doing it in a way to get them fired. We're doing it in a way to further educate them.
I think that point is so valuable because one of the things that was new to the framework, right? And I hope I'm not jumping ahead, but this is interesting because you kind of brought this topic up. I'm going back now, maybe 5 or 6 years. We started to notice that other social engineering trainings and companies were popping up, whereas before, we were the only one that really focused on that. And I never have a problem with that. I think that's great. What that proved to me is that, hey, we had a good idea. It was right because now other people are doing it, right? But what I started to notice is that those other companies and trainings focused a lot on winning and not so much the mantra that we came up with, which is leave them feeling better for having met you. And it really kind of disturbed me. I started to see almost fraudulent activities taking place in these trainings that really upset me. And I would sit there and go, oh man, I actually had a bunch of students come into a class once and say, dude, why would you do that in a class and say something that happened in another class? And I'm like, well, that's not mine. And they assumed it was mine because no one else had been doing SE training. And I said, I would never do that. And they were mad at me because they thought that I had another trainer and we were doing this other type of class. So we wrote, as part of the framework, a code of ethics. And it was really, really important to me. I remember that day that we sat down as a team. We talked about what was happening in the field. And I don't say this lightly, and I don't say this self-aggrandizing either, but we realized that a lot of what was happening in the field of social engineering was due to the work that we were doing here at this company, right? We led the way. We were the first social engineering training ever to be at Black Hat. We were the first social engineering training ever to be issued, right? SANS didn't have one. No one had one. We were the first one to have a practical certification for social engineering. And we were the very first social engineering framework to ever be issued. So I said, okay, that means that there's a responsibility here at this company that everyone else that came after kind of built their foundation on us. So I said, I feel this responsibility to issue a code of ethics. So we did. And what we did is we made it as the very first part of everything you see when you join the framework, when you go to the framework. And to me, that was a super important piece because we're like, okay, you could take it. What you just said was accurate. You could take every one of these skills. You can go out and you can use them to be a horrible person, to manipulate other people, to force them into doing things, to make them feel bad. But our hope is that you would take all of these skills, understand what the bad guys do, but always use our framework and our code of ethics to do the positive thing. So our very first part, from what you said with that last pretext is, using sympathy and assistance requests without saying, if you don't do this, I'm going to get fired. Right now that person has guilt, shame. That's not great. But what you do is you offer them assistance to make their life easier with no threat of harm. And now if that pretext works, you have something to educate on, right? You could say, oh, this person fell for it 100% just to be nice. Let's tell them what they can do next time so they don't give that password out. And that code of ethics to me is such an important piece of the puzzle when it comes to our framework.
Yeah, that code of ethics is one of the first things that you see when you get to the social engineering framework. And there's often a common debate or question that comes up in the field when people are releasing information. This happens a lot when people release either penetration testing tools, hacking tools, or exploits, or these kinds of things, where the question comes up like, well, if you're going to make that available, then the malicious actors can use that as well. You're giving these tools to the people that are then going to go hack into the hospitals, hack into all these essential facilities. Have you had any kind of concerns or thoughts about whether you are also educating people on how to do these kinds of things? Because you put that code of ethics up there, but it's not required that anybody does it. It's just more of a statement of this is what we believe in, and this is what we want you to believe in, but there's no way to force anybody to do that. So do you have concerns that you are teaching these human potential manipulation skills freely to people that are going to use it badly?
Yeah. I mean, I think it would be irresponsible to say, no, I'm not worried about that at all. I think the same way that a knife manufacturer or a car manufacturer worries about someone using their product to harm another human, right? My wonderful chef's knives out in my kitchen, I'm sure that the people who designed them to be the sharp, beautiful tools they are never said, oh, this can really kill a human good, right? They didn't think that. But sadly, some of those devices can be used in a very malicious way. When I designed all of this and when we came out with all these trainings, we fully knew that these things can be used by malicious people to do bad things. And we've actually seen it, even in our industry. We've seen people take the skills that we've taught, and then they went out and they did things that I feel are just terrible and totally unethical. But here's the but, and I don't say but as erasing everything before it. that how do the good guys ever get to know how to defend if there's no one teaching them? So, and I use this analogy all the time. You want to learn a martial art or boxing or something like that. If you really want to learn it, not just watch it on television and, be an armchair sport enthusiast, you have to get into a gym and you have to learn how to punch a heavy bag, and you have to learn how to stand. You have to learn how to hold your hands. You have to learn how to take a punch, how to give a punch. You have to learn how to hold all of your position in order to do that effectively. And that means at some point your trainer is going to put another human on the other side of you who is going to be throwing punches at you. And that may hurt a little at times. But the goal of that sparring partner, as we call them, isn't to break your face or to break your arm or to kill you. It's to help you be the best defender that you can. So I look at that as the same answer as what we were saying before, is that your intent in doing this is what changes the influence of it. Is it negative? Is it positive? So yeah, I do always worry, and I'll give you a story that kind of hits on this. Is there was this, I can't remember how many years ago, it was a while ago, but there was this big hack that happened against a large company. And a federal agency had put a sting out, and they caught this guy. And when the newspaper was put out, they had pictures of his computer, and on his computer, on one of the tabs that they took a picture of, was the SE framework was open, right? And somebody, I didn't see it. Somebody had zoomed in, saw it, circled it, sent it to me, and go, "What do you think about that?" And I'm like, "Well, that really sucks." But I also feel that it's still a responsible thing to make sure that the good guys know these skills. Otherwise, there is no defense, right? Think about how many times in the past 5, 6, 7 years we went out to talk to people and they've never even heard the term vishing. But now it's in newspapers so much, it's on television so much, we talk about it nonstop, that it's really odd to find someone who's never heard the term vishing. Let's say in the corporate space, they've heard it. So why is that good? Well, it's because now the first stage of being secure is being aware. And if you don't know something exists, you can't secure against it. So us doing this and us having this framework out there, there's always a potential for negative use, but I still feel that it's a very important thing to have out there. So that way we can help defend people from it.
And I think that last point that you made is a big one, because lots of times when I talk to friends and people that I meet and they ask what I do for a living, and I kind of explain it to them, sometimes they look at me a little bit sideways, like, "So you're one of the bad guys, the scammers." And I have to explain, no. I do those types of things, but I still do it in a good way for the awareness. As like you said, for example, recently I was speaking to one of our clients, and they had concerns about the amount of information that some of their employees have online, where they have all kinds of social media, they have all kinds of personal websites, blogs, and they're like, "What can we do to fix that?" And I told them, like, well, I wouldn't go to those employees and tell them they're doing it wrong. And I wouldn't say that they need to take all that down, but I would tell them to be aware of that kind of profile that they have out there and make them aware of what types of things can be done with that information. What are the different types of attacks that somebody who's a malicious could potentially use that against them, just so that they're aware and they have that awareness of what is available out there for people to use.
Yeah, and I agree with that 100%. I think that's why we will continue to do it. And our hope always is that it will not get used by the bad guys, but we'll not stop educating the good guys just because the bad guys are going to continue being bad.
So there are also principles of influence listed in the social engineering framework. And one that I came across that I thought was kind of neat and fun to think about, and I'm hoping that you're able to talk about it just a little bit, was this idea of a human buffer overflow, where if anybody has done any kind of, computer hacking or anything like that, you've probably encountered a buffer overflow where you're able to just fill up the memory. So it's, going to be basically, to use a very basic term, that it's broken, not working the way that it should, and then be able to put other instructions into the memory to make the computer do other things that it wasn't really wanting to do. So is the human buffer overflow going to be similar in that way, where there are certain situations that can come up where somebody might then act in a way that they don't really expect or maybe even want to at that moment?
Yeah, and it is very much like exploiting software, right? So you have a software crash, and anyone who's ever done any exploit writing, you analyze the crash spot. You see that maybe there is a buffer there that you could then jump to another address that you can add, you can inject a command. And if all that's successful, you may be able to inject enough, if there's enough space there, to inject a shell code. So you can get a shell back on that computer, or tell it to take another action, or tell it to download something, or, all the different things you can do. So in the human sense, what we're looking for is something that stops the normal rational operation of the brain and allows a command to be injected that has a greater likelihood of being executed because the normal rational functions of the brain aren't there. And, I have a very simplistic example on the framework, which has this little diagram that has the color that's written out. So I think it says yellow, but the color of the word yellow is green. And it says, okay, now you have to read the colors, not the words. Right. So you get this graphic up, and as long as you could see colors, right, you go and you see it's green, red, blue, right? You have to read these colors, but not the word that's there, but the actual color of the word. And most people can get 3 or 4 in, and all of a sudden our brains want to read the words, and we're reading the word red, but it's supposed to be blue, but we're saying red now. Well, what's happened? Our brain takes over and doesn't know how to translate that command. So it does what it naturally would do, which is read the word, not the color. So when I think about that, I say, okay, how do we understand how decisions are made? There's a wonderful book by a man named Dr. Daniel Goleman. It's called Emotional Intelligence. And in that book, he spoke about something called the amygdala. So we have 2 of them, the amygdalae. They're tiny little walnut-sized pieces of gray matter in our brain. And they handle all this external stimuli, right? So it comes into our brain, let's say from our eyes, our taste, our feeling, our smell, all of our senses. And it makes physiological and psychological change, before our brain actually processes those modalities, right? So an example I use all the time is if you're deathly afraid of snakes, you're walking out in your yard, and out of the corner of your eye, you see something long and black. And your brain says, snake. What happens? Your eyes open wide, your lips pull back, you reel back like this, you gasp for air. Why? Well, that fear response does a few things. That first F is freeze, right? So you freeze and all of this happens. And why? Physiologically, let's think about it. Your eyes open wide because now if you did this and it was a dangerous animal coming at you, that's a pretty dumb thing, right? So if you close your eyes, you clench them, you're going to die, right? So your eyes open wide so you can take in your surroundings. You gasp for air, that oxygenates the blood, getting you ready for the next 2 Fs, either fight or flight. When you reel back and all your muscles tense, a shot of adrenaline gets released into your bloodstream, which again is preparing you for fight or flight. Now, a second later, not even, I think it's 125 milliseconds later, your optical cortices catch up and they go, oh, it's the garden hose, silly. And you calm down and you go about your day. But if it is a snake, now your brain goes, that is a snake. Get the heck out of here. And you have time to run. Whereas if that didn't happen automatically, you might be walking towards, and that 125 milliseconds might be long enough that the snake comes up and bites you and you're dead. Right? So that has been designed in us to protect us from harm. Now, the thing that Dr. Goleman found, which I find fascinating using fMRI helmets, is that when that occurs, the frontal part of the brain where logic and reasoning are all there, not open. It's completely dark. Nothing's lit up. All the stuff that's lit up is right around the amygdala, right in that center of the brain. So what does that mean? Well, at that moment, you're making every decision based on that emotion of fear, not rational thinking. Which makes sense in that instance, right? In the instance of a snake, you wouldn't want to go, I wonder what kind of snake that is. I wonder if there's a rattle. Is it poisonous? I should go do some research. You want your brain to go, snake, get out and find out later if it was dangerous or not, right? So, okay, what does that have to do with the human buffer overflow? We see this all the time in malicious attacks. You get an email, and the email says your credit card, thank you for this payment on your credit card for $700 for buying this item. Now, you may be sitting here going, that doesn't work. But think about the first time you ever got an email like that. And what happens? You're sitting like, oh, your eyes open wide. You get afraid. You're like, what? How did my credit card get hacked? Did my bank get hacked? What's happening? And that fear response, now all the training you had to open up a browser, to go to your credit card's website, to log in, to check if there really was an order done, all of that goes out the window. And what do? You click that link because you're like, oh, I can't have my credit card. No, that's too much. I don't have $700 in my bank account. And you click that link, and now it opens up what looks like a login page. Well, your brain is still full of fear. So you start typing in your username and password, and the screen blips. You're like, oh, I must have fat fingered it because I'm typing too fast. And you type it in again, and now you log into your bank account and you see, oh, there's nothing there. Oh boy, I wonder why I got that email. And you go about your day. But what's happened in that attack is that first website that opened that looked identical was a credential harvester. And you gave the bad guys your credentials, your username and password for your bank site or your credit card site. Then when it refreshed, it went to the real site. And now when you logged in and you saw nothing, your brain comes down and you're like, I wonder why that happened. That's so weird. And you delete the email and go about your day. But now the bad guys have login to your stuff, and they can empty your bank account or do all sorts of bad things to you. This is an example of how human decision making that is there to protect us in times of actual danger is now weaponized and used against us. Just like a buffer overflow, when you have an overflow in a piece of software, it was designed. Why are there crashes in software? Well, they make it so if software crashes, it's so that this computer doesn't lock up and use all your memory and kill your computer. Right? It's designed so that way the software crashes, not the computer. Well, the same here. Our crash in our brain is so we have that immediate response, and we get out of fear, we get out of danger's way because of fear. But now it's weaponized by someone, and we take an action that we shouldn't take. That's a really long explanation, but I'm sorry that I had to go through all of that. But that explains the human buffer overflow.
That explanation, and especially all the different detail that you go into with that. And I'm thinking if other people are interested to hear more about that kind of thing, especially the principles of influence and the psychology of it, if you haven't already, you can also check out the Doctor Is In podcast with Chris and Dr. Abby, where they're talking about those exact types of things every month. Before we wrap this up, Chris, is there any advice that you would want to give on who the social engineering framework would be for? What other types of things in there? Like, I think some of the things that I saw is there's history of different types of scams and scammers in there, which is really educational to be able to see, like, what is a Ponzi scheme? Who was that named after? All of those types of things are in there as well. Are there any other types of things that are in the framework that you think might be found interesting to people?
Yeah, I think the framework's made, I mean, this is going to sound like such a generic answer, but it's made for everybody. And that's the reason we wrote it that way, is maybe you know all of that, so you don't need that part. So you could skip over the history. But then we have some people, I had students that come to me and they're like, I want to get into this field. What should I read first? And I'm like, go to the framework. This gives you literally the history, like through human history, how social engineering has been used, both in good and bad. And then it goes through the principles. And we have a team of people. I remember when I started this, it was just me and a couple people. Now I have a whole team of people here that are constantly reading that, updating to new research and science. So we work hard every year to make sure that the framework stays current. And now with Dr. Morono here on staff, we're going to definitely be adding a lot more psychology and science to it. So I'm excited about that. But the framework really was designed to enthusiasts. If you're an adversarial simulator, if you're a CISO and you're trying to think about what kind of SE things should we be planning for this year, if you're a student who's getting into the field and writing papers, if you're a young person just wants to understand how this can be used against you, if you're a grandparent, I can go on, but I think it's designed to really be an educational resource for anyone who has any interest in social engineering.
I think that's really a great way to explain it, that it really is for anybody, much like at the beginning where you were talking about the FACE class and somebody that came in just to be a better dad, that these things can be used by anyone in a positive way.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. I'm glad you came up with this topic. You know, we haven't talked about the framework on the podcast, I want to say in many years, because we kind of just put it out there and just think, oh, people will go to it. But I'm excited that, we added the code of ethics. Recently it's been updated a bit. You'll notice that even if we take a section out or make it so, like we had to change some things when I first wrote the framework. We had a whole section on NLP, neuro-linguistic programming. And science has disproven that as accurate, science, a million times. So we left the section in there so that way people don't think that we we're hiding our past, but we wrote that this is no longer valid. And science has disproved it. And we've listed the studies that we found that show how NLP has been disproved. So, we're doing things like, even if we have to change something, we'll try to explain why we're changing it, how it's been changed, and what that change means. So, when you go there, please feel free. If you have knowledge on something, if you're listening to this, you go read it and you think, hey, something needs to be updated, or there's a piece of research that kind of negates something we have there, please send it in to us. We want that information. If we have something inaccurate up there, help us to make it accurate, but enjoy it. And like Patrick said in the beginning, keep sending us these topics, because we love to get these suggestions from people.
This has been a whole lot of fun. Do you think we should do this again next month?
Let me think about it. Yeah. Okay. We can do one more.
All right. Let's do another one next month. Should we even let the topic slip a little bit?
Okay. Yeah. Well, if you want to tell them, you want to give them a teaser, or do you want to let them find out?
I think we just a little high level. We might even talk about a book, because I know in many of your podcasts you like to get book recommendations, and you're a pretty avid reader with a huge library. And even on the website, there is a listing of all the different book recommendations. So based on that, I thought, this might be fun just to talk about a book, have our own book club next month. Let's do that.
I like it. Let's do that. Okay. Well, we'll talk about a book next month. So thank you, everybody, for joining us this month. And thank you, Patrick, for this great topic. Hopefully we'll get to see some of you in training, and we'll talk to you all next month. See you.